Hello, my dear sisters. I am so excited to be with you during these sessions. I'm excited for our time together, and let me tell you, your leaders have chosen an excellent theme for our weekend. Our theme is known, and I'm just going to start out right out of the gate and let you know that this topic is massive. Now, we use the word knowing, or derivatives of that word, knowledge, known. We use that in our language so commonly. So it's really such a commonplace word. And yet it has this underbelly of this well of meaning and emotion and experience. And there's some raw places in there. There are some raw places in there. So we're going to use this first session to build 4 platforms on which we're going to have this conversation about this idea of being known. So we're going to dive right in together. Now, this first one comes out of just our basic definition of known. If you do, type in Google Dictionary known, you come up with words like recognized, familiar, and within the scope of knowledge. So there is a reality for each one of us. You might be in a workplace situation. You might be just working your tail off at home. Wherever you're investing and engaging your energy and your resources, there's a reality that each one of us desires to be recognized, wants to be noted for our gifts and our contributions to the team or to the family. And so this first platform that we're going to build around this conversation is, we're going to say, known as acknowledged. And man, that is a real thing. That is a real thing. And that might be pointed to where any one of you are at right now in the situations of your own life, that you are working your tail off, somewhere at something, and you are longing and desiring for somebody to notice your contribution, to acknowledge what you bring to the table, and celebrate the value of that. So man, that is a real thing. And that's our first platform in this conversation about being known. We're going to say known as acknowledged. Now, when we look into the scriptures and the words they use for known, if you look in either the Hebrew throughout the Old Testament or the Greek in the New Testament, one of the things I love about those languages is sometimes their meanings just have more layers to them. The culture and the language is a little bit richer in metaphor and layers of meaning than my English language, which is my first language. So looking up the word known, or again, that would have that same root as derivatives of that word, so knowledge or knowing, all those different words, they have this little extra layer to the meaning of those words in both the Hebrew and the Greek, that is knowing as perceiving. And we're going to say perceiving as seeing. Perceiving has to do with the eyes and seeing into something. So I love that, because sometimes Western culture paints knowing as something very intellectual. It's a very academic, intellectual thing to know and gain knowledge. But in other cultures, they know that there's more to it than that. And so they bring it a little bit deeper into knowing as perceiving, and perceiving means seeing. And so this is the second platform for our conversation around the word known. We're going to be talking about known as seen. So known as acknowledged, and known as seen. Now, there is a beautiful story in the scriptures about this particular thing. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but in Genesis 16, there's a story some of you I'm sure will know about Abraham and Sarah, and they're waiting for the promised son that God has promised them, and they're old and Sarah's barren, they're not having kids. And so Sarah, being an excellent, strong, amazing woman, takes matters into her own hands and says, "Hey, Abram, here's my maidservant Hagar. Sleep with her, get her pregnant, and then we'll take her kid." So that's something that was so common and normal in that day. So it was a normal thing for her to think that this is acceptable. Let's do this. This is a good plan. But it's amazing to witness. You can just see traces of it through the scriptures in this story in Genesis 16 of a heart journey that Hagar experiences underneath these events. And I think that's cool because even in our culture today, I think there's a lot of things that just seem really normal. This is normal for us to do, for us to think about in our culture. But sometimes you and I can recognize a heart journey underneath that is crying out. It's telling a different story. And I think we're supposed to listen to those heart cries and listen to those heart journeys because there's something in them that is speaking to us about who we are, who God created us to be, and what His plan is and what He's doing in the world. So even though it was actually normal for Abram and Sarah to do this in Genesis 16, there's this heart journey underneath, and Hagar begins to despise Sarah, and eventually, she does get pregnant, the child is born, and it's just war between her and Sarah. It's terrible, and eventually Hagar runs away, and she ends up having this encounter with God. God is so beautiful, and in His grace, He meets her there, and she has this experience with God, and then she says this, "Have I seen the God who sees me?" She was longing to be seen. She was longing to be acknowledged, not to be just walked all over, not to be missed and treated like she was not even a human being. She was longing to be recognized and acknowledged and noted as a human being. But even deeper than that, she was longing to be seen, to be heard, and to be understood. Along with being seen and being heard, don't we long to be understood? So God knows that need and meets Hagar in that place. When I think of this platform, which is known as Seen, I am humbled to remember some things in my own journey, and I have two beautiful daughters. They are 8, almost 9, and 10 years old, and we were having a conversation just the other day where I told them, you know what, girls, when I was in grade 3, I so vividly, very, very vividly, remember being on the playground, all the kids, we're at school, all the kids it's recess or lunchtime, all the kids are going wild and having a blast, climbing, playing games, loud, running all over the place, and the bell rings and we're heading back towards the school to go back to our classes, and I remember walking like I was all alone and thinking to myself, I am invisible. And I remember actually looking over and seeing another student in a wheelchair and actually thinking, I wish something like that would happen to me so that I would be seen. Now, I am much wiser today to recognize that that is not usually the case for people who are in those situations. And so that was a very immature way to think about that. But at the same time, how amazing that at that young age we can be so fully aware and caught up in an experience of being unseen, of living invisible. So I don't know if there's anybody listening to this who resonates and connects with that, and who can trace in her story, in your story, a time when you felt unseen, or a time when you felt unheard, or even in all of that, feeling so misunderstood. Well, this kind of gets us down to this next layer that's this third platform that we're going to build around this conversation of being known. And this one I find really fascinating. My husband and I just recently started reading a book by Dr. Sue Johnson called Created for Connection. So that's actually a marriage book. And I'm not even finished the book yet, but so far I highly recommend it. But she has presented some really beautiful research and ideas around our need for connectedness. And so we're going to just move down a little bit deeper. And she talks about, many of you would be familiar with the term failure to thrive. Now, that is a term that is used, and it has been used, around infants who are born and then can't seem to survive, and so they die. And there would be a lot of factors involved in that, but one of the factors that plays into it and that has been part of that conversation for decades now has to do with a lack of emotional attachment. So a lack of emotional attachment around this particular infant is a factor playing into their eventual death. Now that is massive and very humbling, but it became apparent to Dr. Sue Johnson, and I think some others as well, that this plays into our lives even as adults. That it's fascinating to process and think about, wait a minute, we as human beings have been built and wired to need food, we need water, we need oxygen. We have these basic needs for survival. But it is very possible, even probable, maybe even absolutely for sure, that we need healthy emotional attachments in our lives as well for us to survive. But what about even us thriving? Now, I have a stubborn desire to thrive. I don't know about you, but I have that for you. If you don't have that for yourself, I have that for you, and I know a lot of other women who have that for you. We want you to thrive, not just survive and exist on food and water and oxygen. Have you ever felt a failure to thrive as an adult that you can trace back to a lack of healthy emotional attachment? That's kind of interesting to think about. Now, Dr. Sue Johnson pulls this out to dialogue and discuss these ideas of our ability to find safe places that build a security at the base of our soul, that we can sort of stand on and face the challenges of life. We can stand in strength and be empowered because of this foundational sense of security and safety that is created by the healthy and safe, and that means they're unconditional emotional attachments in our life. So that means that there are people in our lives who love us unconditionally, so that we know no matter what happens, no matter what we do, I've got this person who's got my back. This person has my back. This person believes in me. There is something to that. And I think that we've been missing that in our culture for a long time. Dr. Larry Crabb, I'm going to just look down here and read a quote from his book, Soul Talk. And he says, most people go through their entire life never speaking words to another human being that come out of what is deepest within them. And most people never hear words that reach all the way into that deep place we call the soul. So this third platform that we're building, we're going to call this known as attached. And this is actually a place of absolute survival for us as human beings, not just as women, as human beings. But this is the messy place. This is the messy place where we don't do that. Like Larry Crabb is saying, we keep that stuff hidden. We don't speak to one another with words out of our own souls to another person's soul, where we can build that kind of deep and beautiful connectedness within a community. It could be just a few people, but that the research is showing that, and of course we know this in scripture already, that is so necessary, not only to us being able to actually survive as human beings and have any kind of vitality to our lives, but for us to be thriving and empowered as women of God. There's something necessary in that. But you know what? That is not just about our relationships with other people. This is also about our relationship with God. This is primarily about our relationship with God. And this is the place that we are going to sit in these sessions together. Now, there is a fourth platform that leads us to, and I'm just going to introduce it a little bit right now, but we're going to deal with it more in our next session. But we're going to call it known as oneness. So we have known as acknowledged. You know, what an important thing that is for each one of us, just to feel acknowledged as human beings. We bring something of value to the table. We have gifts, we have talents, we matter. That's so important. And then our second platform that we built is known as seen. That means that we're perceiving, or someone is perceiving us. Someone's perceiving the me that is behind the surface me. And not even just, a pretense kind of surface, just actual, your physical surface. When we look at each other, that's why you can look at somebody who's so beautiful and you just assume they're happy. But we have to perceive with eyes that see, to look beyond what is just on the outside and see and hear and understand another human being, or this being done for us. In order to, then we move to our third platform, where known as attached becomes such an important part of this conversation. For us to then move into a realm where my soul is engaged with your soul in a healthy, secure, safe connectedness. And that's life-giving. That is stirring life up in me. I'm going to read just another quote for you about this idea of being attached or being connected. And this is from Larry Crabb in a different book called Connecting. He says, we realize when we feel that kind of connection, we realize that someone sees us as we are and still delights in us, still believes that we could become responsible, giving people, that someone sees us as fundamentally acceptable. Courage develops and hope appears, and we press on with life, eager not only to receive more connection, but also to provide it for others. So something so important happens to us when we are able to build these healthy, strong, secure attachments in our life. We're going to talk a little bit about how complicated that can be. But first, we're going to let that just lead us into this fourth platform we're going to just introduce in this session, that is known as oneness. And I am going to throw out to you an idea that these places of our heart that are the very places that most of us hide, that we withdraw, that we feel shame. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, that we cover this place. We cover up who we are in these deep places. But that these things point to the whole purpose of who we are, not just as women, but even as human beings. And that God has a design that is so amazing for what we can experience with Him and with others. And it's something that is so profound that it is woven into the very fabric of how we were created, the creation story all the way back in Genesis, when God made man and woman and the two shall become one flesh. Then that thread moving all the way throughout the whole Bible, the whole story of Scripture, where God is over and over again trying to regain this oneness that was like He wants to dwell with His people. And then we'll see Jesus, and we see the birth of the church, and it's all culminating in what is the marriage supper of the Lamb, when God is able to bring His bride, who is this whole body of Christ, who is the church, who is all those who believe in Him, into a restored oneness. This is the purpose of marriage, is this restored oneness between us and God in an incredible communal experience of oneness where we are participating in the divine nature. Now that is all through the Scriptures, and it is so profoundly powerful. And what I want to leave you with in this session, but also after all of these sessions, is this desire, really a bubbling up of joy, that you can celebrate who you are as a woman, that there is no shame in having an emotional heart, because I hope that by the end of these sessions, you're going to know that this is the most powerful weapon against the enemy of our souls. And this is the most beautiful part of being made in the image of God. Man, girls, it's good. You are amazing. And when we dig into this place in our heart and in our soul where we've been broken, and it gets messy, and we feel shame, and we feel rejection, we're going to build a platform to have this conversation and celebrate God's vision that we can be known in oneness with Him and with each other, and that this is such an amazing part, a necessary part of being a human being, and then especially for us as we're talking about this together, being a woman, not just surviving, a woman who is thriving. So I'm excited for our sessions and our talks together. God's been already blessing me with these very things that we're talking about. So I'm going to leave you with this. Do you have certain words as we moved through those 4 platforms that connect and resonate with where you are at in your story today? Do you long to feel acknowledged, recognized, noted, and valued for what you bring to the table? Do you long to be seen and heard? Do you have a voice that's just longing to be heard and made space for? And do you long to be understood, to be heard and then understood? And then do you long for those emotional attachments that provide sort of a basic ability to live, to have vitality to your life, where there's this foundation of emotional attachments that are healthy and secure and safe? And then we're going to talk about this idea of oneness. Do you long for oneness with God and with others, where all together we live in such an incredible unity? Man, it's beautiful. So I'm excited to see where God takes us as we continue these conversations about being known. Blessings, dear sisters, and sleep well tonight.